Greetings, this is Gabriel back with another video in a series on self-publishing books on Amazon, KDP. Right now I'm working on an illustration for a book I'm working on called Ernest Hemingway's In Our Time. It's a collection of vignettes. It was one of the earliest published works by Ernest Hemingway. It's a very short read, compelling, almost poetic series of 18 vignettes. I've been working on it for quite a while, longer than some other ones. It's kind of been on the back burner and I've been slowly plugging away. But I'm trying to get this one done and out there. So this is all, right here you can see instead of a website, I just have what's called a link tree, which is just a link to all of my different books that have been published so far. And I'm really trying to speed up and refine my process and get a process down to, ideally I'd like to put out a book a week or maybe even more. So I have the content of the book mostly in place, but one thing I like to do, now this isn't something that I have to do, but it is something I like doing, so it's something that I'm going to continue with, and that is I like to do contribute original illustrations to the books I publish. Now, if you're publishing public domain work, that is work that doesn't have a copyright, very, very generally, one way to identify that a work is free of copyright in the United States is if it was published 1930 or before. So when you publish public domain works like that on Amazon, usually you have to contribute some original changes or updates or revisions to the work. Now, two of the most direct and easy to explain changes you can make are illustrations or annotation. Now, for illustrations, what I'm working on now would be an example of an illustration. I believe under the guidelines you would need 10 illustrations in order to have it qualify under the requirements. That is something that's doable, but if you want to do 10 illustrations, you got to think about the amount of time that it would take to create 10 illustrations. So, on the other hand, you can use AI to do this, but you got to be careful about creating consistent quality if you are going to use AI. There's something I like about contributing my own original illustration, but again, 10 can be time consuming, and if you're trying to do 10 unique masterpieces, that could take quite a while. So you have to balance the efficiency and the speed and the economy with putting in something of a quality that you're proud of. One thing that I've found that I like doing is illustrations of the authors. If I'm republishing a book by a famous author, I like to do my own unique illustrations of them. Hold on 1 minute. I'm having some challenges with Blender. So another thing that I wanted to share with you all is I'm working on a very modest basic computer setup. I'm using mostly free software tools. I just have a basic HP laptop that's several years old. It's at least 5 years old. And in order to create videos like this, there's I'm probably pushing some of the limits on my system, but so on the one hand it is frustrating, and it would always be better to have a shiny new computer and all the bells and whistles, but on the other hand, one of the major points with all of this that I really want to emphasize is that you can, you don't need to invest a lot of money in order to do this work and make something that's really cool. So this is a program called Blender. It's a free open source program. It has quite a bit of a learning curve, but it's incredibly powerful, and I think it's well worth it. If you're interested in doing original illustrations, whether you want to do animation, like an animation cartoon, you want to just do digital art, or if you want to apply original illustrations to books, like I'm doing here, Blender is the program. So it seemed like there was some kind of line there. I was just deleting that. Blender is like using a heavy-duty construction machinery. It's a Swiss Army knife with all the bells and whistles. And this little feature that I'm using called Grease Pencil is just one little tiny specific tip of the iceberg of what Blender can do. If you want to do 3D modeling and things like that, it can do that. And you can see what I've done is I've taken an image of Ernest Hemingway, and this is from around the time that he wrote In Our Time. In Our Time, published in 1924. And this image of Ernest Hemingway, I believe, is from 1924. Very interesting man, very tragic life. Now, I don't know if I want the lines to be a little thicker or if I like this thickness, but I'm going to continue on. And this is a form of tracing. Basically I've brought an image into Blender, but what I love about it is every stroke that I make is an artistic decision that would ultimately be unique from others. And I think Blender is the way to go. The time you invest in Blender will pay off in the long term, but it's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. You'll have to, you can find plenty of tutorials much better than me on YouTube about how to do all the features and figure out how to do anything you want to do in Blender. What I like about the particular photograph is it's somewhat blurry, and there's just the impression of the expression. Now I'm doing lines. I'm also going to go in and do shadows separately. This book I think has been published quite a bit, but that's again not the only controlling factor in deciding which books to publish. Another thing that I'm really interested in is I'm curating a collection of books. So I kind of feel like if it's on a spectrum, the Ernest Hemingway, even though there might be a lot of competition and it's kind of a more saturated title, In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway, adding that to the collection with the next book, if I pick something that's a little bit more of a rare gem, by an author that's a little less well known, I like the idea of on the bookshelf kind of placing these works together. So the work that I put next to Ernest Hemingway, I think it sends a powerful message, and it's a very interesting thing to do in terms of I'm thinking not just about the individual book I'm working on, but I'm thinking about the collection of books, and having Ernest Hemingway in the collection is an important factor for me. Now, more than that, though, is the book itself, In Our Time. Very powerful vignettes, very, very short. You know, these are like what you might call like the equivalent of like a Twitter post almost, you know, in modern standards in terms of, you know, what Ernest Hemingway was writing within our time. And also, what is he writing about? He's writing about his experiences in World War One. And his writing about the war is really activating. There's some social commentary in there as well, you know, about some political items of the day. He has a vignette about, you know, police discrimination and harassment, or police assassination of immigrants, for example, in one of the vignettes. And, you know, he has some incredible stuff about bullfighting, which, you know, he's some famous, iconic. Now you can see what I'm doing is I'm putting in shadow. So I have a layer of lines and then a layer of shadow. And, you know, again, like I talked about previously, there's a million different little decisions that can be made, and I'm trying. However, I admit, you know, this is a style that I do in other works, so I'm not trying, again, I'm not trying to be so precious like I'm painting the Mona Lisa here. This is just so I have kind of a neat little signature illustration to go along with the book. It's something that I enjoy doing. Let's see. Sometimes you can zoom in for the content. Sometimes it's nice to take a step back and just get some of these shapes in more randomly. Let's save this. You know, Blender can crash like all, and again, I'm not working with the best computer ever, so I want to make sure to save it. I feel like still like maybe the tie is a little bit off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more color. It's called a material. Just to try and get the tie and I'm going to put it underneath the other layers. It's kind of overkill. This way. I could do it for the suit as well and all of that, but for this particular piece, I don't want to. So I think we're getting close, but maybe the color is off. A little lighter. Maybe bring it closer to the white. Yeah, I think that does it. I'm going to make it even a little bit more whiter. I don't want it to draw the eye too much. But I want to distinguish it from the shirt and the suit. I think that does it. Let me go in here. I think I like that. Do I want it anywhere else? I think the answer is no. I could put it in the face, add more detail like a secondary shadow, but I'm good. So one thing with this type of image is, I talked in another video, I think when I was working in GIMP, you know, if I save it like this, you know, I can render it out, but then the white will be white. But I want it to be transparent. In order to do that, there's a certain setting you got to go in. That's one thing about Blender. It is a learning curve. So now if I hit render image, this will render it out as a PNG. So I can add this to the about the author. I'm happy with that. Close that. File, save. Okay, so I'm going to do just a couple things to finish this off. So I'm going to crop it. I could crop it in Blender itself, but it's just faster to crop this image in a program like just a photo editor. And again, because it's a PNG and the way different viewers will show transparency or handle PNGs differently, it might look a little weird here, but you can kind of see in the right over here in the preview window, that's the look I'm going for. Where, and again, the reason why transparency is important is if I'm printing this on a book and the page of the book is white, then this will look good on that. If I have a background that's white and say it's a rectangle image, and the white in my image is slightly different than the color of the white of the paper, then you'll see that rectangle border in the book when it's published. However, if I do it this way where it's transparent, I'm letting the page itself be the white, and there won't be any kind of rectangle border around the illustration. So that's why that's helpful for this. Okay. And just while I was talking about be faster, sometimes this Microsoft editor isn't very good. So I can do it with GIMP. So what I'm going to do next today is I have the paperback laid out in a program called Scribus, and that's where I work on the paperback. I did some refinements on some of those annotation sections I was talking about, the about the author, some stuff in the front, the formatting. I've been doing that since some of my prior videos, so my hope is to get it all polished up and ready to go. I still need to do the cover, but the cover, I have the basic design for it, so it shouldn't take too long. All right, this is cropping in GIMP. And I'm not even going to save this GIMP file. I'm just exporting the image because it's just a crop. There we go. So now we can go into Scribus. And again, Scribus is a layout, you don't do the writing of the book in Scribus, but this is where you lay out all the text to get all the margins and everything right. And when you're getting your paperback, this is for the paperback and hardcover version of the book. I haven't done hardcovers yet, but I do plan to go into hardcovers and see, sell them at a little bit more of a premium. So when I talked about annotation, this editor's note on modern translation, this, for example, is that I did do. This book is called Illustrations. This is a slightly different version of Illustrations, where I did more of like a photo image, piece for this work, instead of just the straight illustrations. But what we're going to is the about the author. Okay, so you see the about the author. I have a placeholder image, but I'm putting in there. And it's arguable that maybe the photo would look better, but I like this. Okay, so I do need to go in and do some final revisions to this book. One of the primary revisions, this is just something that I find interesting. So you can see, and this is kind of a question for a book editor, but "In Our Time" by Ernest Hemingway is not capitalized. Ernest Hemingway is capitalized. Now, in the original 1924 version of "In Our Time," that's how it was. And you can see "In Our Time" by Ernest Hemingway. And even Ernest Hemingway had his name lowercase. Now, by the time it was published in 1925, which was like a subsequent edition where he added some longer stories to it, he kept the original vignettes but added some other stories. "In Our Time" was capitalized, and there's actually a review I found, a critical review of the book, where the critic of the day was saying, that the convention of having "In Our Time" lowercase was, a little bit trying too hard to be modern. And this is 1924, so the modern of that time, and that had already been done a little bit, and how that was an original kind of device to kind of show how you're kind of rebelling against the conventions, but how that, it was kind of overplayed and a little bit too like a gimmick, is basically the essence of what the review had said. And, again, it was changed in the 1925 edition that was printed where it was capitalized. But that leaves the question for me is, when now in 2025, 101 years later, what do I want to do with it? And I think it's almost fresh again to take an Ernest Hemingway title and put it in lowercase. The context now is enhanced, or there's additional layers of meaning and kind of symbolism when you're taking an Ernest Hemingway book now, because now Ernest Hemingway became the legend that he was to become. Instead of this being one of his first books where there was a very small, limited printing and it made a lot of waves in Paris and in literary circles, now Ernest Hemingway is like Nobel Prize winning, literary giant. So to lowercase his work is an interesting, to lowercase the title of his book is interesting, especially when that was how he originally did it. So it's kind of restoring his original, going back to the scrappy young writer that he was when this was written. So that's an interesting choice that I get to decide in publishing my version of the book. Now, another thing I've done is I've added, I'm calling it in a modern translation, I've added some very light text. I'm trying to keep it as sparse as the original work, but this text right here that's italicized is something that I've added that wasn't in the original. And that's why I'm calling it a modern translation. And what I'm trying to do is, this is, I think of it very much like when I read these vignettes, I thought of music. And I used AI to create an album of 18 songs, one for each of these vignettes. And in writing the album to make them the vignettes, I added what you would call like choruses, and it's very, very basic. Like, for example, in our time there was the war. So having some statements like that, and some people might say, hey, you're messing with Hemingway's words, and that's blasphemy or whatever. But I mean, I'm being open about it. I'm putting it in, and that's another thing that I found interesting about this particular project, is the ability to go in and make little tweaks. I'm being transparent about it, but to make these tweaks and to put it out there. And if someone wants to read a version without these tweaks, then they can find In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway very readily. It's free. You can buy a version on Amazon, but it's also free. It's on Project Gutenberg and the Internet archives, so they can freely go and access it. But there's a question of, in making a modern translation 101 years later, if you make any changes, be transparent about it and be intentional about it. I'm wrapping up this video so I can go more in other videos, continue the conversation about what my intention is in making these tweaks. But at its essence, I think the words speak for themselves, and what the message is for modern times is there was the war. And I think that those who know about it, but there's a lot of people that need perhaps a reminder that there was the war. Anyway, I'm not trying to get too heavy or lectury, but this is kind of where I'm coming at behind the scenes in publishing this book. So I'm going to take a break. I'm going to have lunch soon. I'm going to go and do some more refinements on this. I don't know if I'll make a video when I'm going in and getting this paperback version ready, but I will check in when I'm at a good spot to make another video. Anyway, thank you for watching. There will be more. My name is Gabriel. There will be more.